What happens when a bold entrepreneur walks into a national talk show and refuses to play small? Danielle Carter came to share her mission, but what unfolded was a live TV moment that shook the room and silenced the critics. This isn't just a story about business, it's about truth, dignity, and what it means to speak up when the world expects you to stay quiet. Danielle Carter wasn't just another success story, she was a force. At 38, she had built a business empire that stretched across technology, consulting, and real estate, each arm designed not just to profit but to empower. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Danielle had grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Her earliest memories were laced with grit, standing in line for free lunches, doing homework by candlelight when the power got cut, hearing no more times than she could count. But Danielle didn't let that define her. She let it drive her. By the time she was 27, she had launched her first company. By 35, she was a multi-millionaire. But what mattered most to her wasn't the money, it was the impact. That's why she created Elevate Her Future, a program laser-focused on giving young black women a real shot at entrepreneurship in the tech and finance sectors. It offered seed funding, mentorship, and access to networks that had long been closed off. Danielle's philosophy was simple: the system wasn't broken, it was built this way, and if the doors won't open, you build your own damn building. When the invitation came from Today's Edge, one of the most watched and most provocative morning talk shows in the country, she didn't hesitate. It was a chance to take her message national, to spotlight the girls her program was lifting, and to shift a narrative that too often painted young black women as statistics instead of innovators. The show was hosted by Madison Reed, a media veteran known for her icy interviews, cutting sarcasm, and a reputation for cornering guests into uncomfortable confessions. Madison had made a career out of towing the line between sharp and ruthless. Danielle knew this wouldn't be a casual sit-down. But she also knew this: she didn't come to play defense. She came to speak truth. The day of the interview, Danielle arrived at the studio in Manhattan just after 7 a.m., stepping out of her car in a mustard yellow pantsuit that turned heads before she even made it through the door. Her natural curls were pulled back into a sleek bun, gold studs in her ears, and a watch on her wrist that had once belonged to her mother. The producers greeted her with polite efficiency. "Makeup, mic check, green room." She nodded, smiled, and sat quietly while her foundation was brushed on. "You've got a calm about you," the makeup artist said. Danielle smiled. "I've learned that peace doesn't mean easy. It means prepared." The woman chuckled. "Well, you're about to be in the lion's den, honey. Madison doesn't let anybody off easy." The studio was cool and bright, lit by an army of overhead panels. The set looked effortless on screen, but in person, it was a blur of cameras, crew members, and whispered cues in earpieces. Danielle took her seat at the glass interview table and crossed one leg over the other, her posture relaxed but alert. Across from her, Madison Reed entered in a navy sheath dress, a stack of cue cards in one hand, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Danielle Carter," she said as she slid into her seat, her voice smooth as a razor. "The woman some are calling the future of inclusive entrepreneurship. Welcome to Today's Edge." Danielle leaned forward slightly and returned the smile with one of her own. "Thanks, Madison. I'm honored to be here." The first few minutes were cordial, even warm. Danielle spoke about her childhood in Atlanta, her early struggles, the moment she decided to stop waiting for opportunity and start building it. Madison nodded along, occasionally interjecting with polished curiosity. It was going well. Until it wasn't. "So, Danielle," Madison said, shifting in her seat. "Let's talk about Elevate Her Future. It's being praised as revolutionary. But critics say programs like this encourage a kind of entitlement. That instead of teaching young women to compete, you're handing them shortcuts. How do you respond to that?" Danielle didn't blink. "I'd say those critics don't understand the starting line isn't the same for everyone," she said, her voice even. "We're not handing out shortcuts. We're handing out shoelaces, because a lot of these young women never had the chance to tie their own." The audience behind the cameras murmured softly. A few heads nodded. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Interesting analogy. But some would argue that effort, not access, is what drives success." That maybe we're focusing too much on fixing systems and not enough on teaching people to adapt. Danielle folded her hands on the table. Adapt to what? Unfairness? Exclusion? I believe in hard work, but I also believe in leveling the playing field. Because telling someone to pull themselves up by the bootstraps doesn't work if they never had boots to begin with. The audience applauded, light at first, then louder. Danielle didn't smile. She didn't need to. She knew the message was landing. Madison leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. But her tone shifted, cooler now, more pointed. Still, isn't focusing exclusively on black women, well, a little exclusionary? What about everyone else? There it was. Danielle had expected it. She had heard it in boardrooms, at fundraisers, even at family dinners. Intentional isn't exclusionary, she replied. We're addressing a gap. And when you fill a gap, you don't take from others, you strengthen the whole foundation. The room grew still. Even the cameraman paused, as if they too were waiting for what came next. Danielle took a breath and leaned in just slightly, her voice steady. This program isn't about handouts. It's about restoring balance. It's about seeing potential where others saw problems. And yes, it centers black women. Because for too long, we've been expected to wait our turn. I say, we build our own table. The applause came again, stronger now. The vibe in the room had shifted. Madison adjusted the cards in her hand but didn't look down at them. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Danielle could see it the moment the control started slipping from the interviewer's grip. But she didn't press it. She didn't gloat. She just sat there, poised, as if she belonged. Because she did. The interview was far from over. But the tone had changed. And everyone watching on set and at home could feel it. Danielle Carter wasn't just answering questions. She was reframing the conversation. Not with anger, not with defensiveness, but with facts, metaphors, and unshakable calm. She was the storm and the shelter. And by the time the first commercial break rolled around, Madison Reed realized she wasn't interviewing another entrepreneur. She was interviewing a movement. The air in the studio had shifted. It was subtle at first, a soft rustle in the crowd, the flicker of eyebrows raised not in doubt but in admiration. Danielle Carter had begun the interview with grace and determination, but now, halfway through, she wasn't just responding, she was reshaping the entire conversation. Madison Reed, seasoned, sharp, and known for cornering guests with the precision of a litigator, had finally realized she wasn't in control of this interview anymore. Danielle's analogies weren't just clever, they were resonant. Her voice wasn't just calm, it was commanding. And what began as a standard morning segment was fast becoming something electric. Still, Madison wasn't the type to yield easily. Her smile, thin and pressed now, barely concealed the tightening tension in her jaw. She leaned forward just slightly, crossing one leg over the other, and said, "Let's dig into the deeper issue, Danielle. Critics, some even from within your own community, have said that programs like Elevate Her Future amount to reverse discrimination. That by focusing exclusively on one group, you're pushing others out. Doesn't that kind of narrow focus create more division than unity?" It was the kind of question meant to make people squirm, the kind that sounded reasonable if you didn't think too hard about the weight behind it. But Danielle didn't squirm. She took a slow breath, lifted her chin, and responded without missing a beat. You don't yell unfair when someone puts out the fire in one house while the others are safe. Her voice carried easily across the set. You thank them for protecting the neighborhood. That's what this program is, it's water on the fire. It's targeted because the problem is targeted. The applause came instantly, louder now, more sustained. A few people in the back of the audience stood. The crew behind the cameras, so often detached from the interviews they filmed, paused to glance up. Even one of the boom operators nodded subtly. Madison's expression flickered, just for a second. But she pressed on, her tone tightening like a vice. I hear that, but shouldn't we be working toward a kind of unity that doesn't require pointing out differences? What about colorblind equity? Isn't constantly talking about race part of the problem? Danielle smiled, not smugly, but knowingly. She had heard this line before, dressed in different language, delivered by different mouths. She tilted her head slightly and spoke slowly, intentionally. Madison, unity sounds beautiful in theory. But you can't build a bridge if you refuse to acknowledge the river beneath it. Ignoring differences doesn't erase them, it just leaves people stranded on opposite shores. The audience murmured again, louder this time. Even Madison's co-host, standing just offset, crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes, sensing the moment veering far from what had been scripted. Danielle didn't flinch. Colorblindness, she continued, sounds noble. But in practice, it often means blindness to pain, to struggle, to history. My program isn't about dividing. It's about acknowledging where the harm was done and making sure healing starts there. A wave of applause swept through the room. Madison leaned back in her chair now, legs uncrossed, fingers tapping the armrest slowly, thoughtfully. She was recalibrating, trying to find a new angle. Her next question came slower, quieter, but it cut just as deep. You said your initiative helps young black women. Why not open it to everyone? Doesn't that make others feel left out? Especially in a time where inclusion is everything? Danielle nodded slowly, her tone still steady. Inclusion, she said, doesn't mean pretending everyone's struggle is the same. It means making sure the ones who've been excluded the longest finally get a seat at the table. She leaned forward, her voice calm but weighty. If a child is falling behind in school, you don't hold back the rest of the class just so it's fair. You help that child catch up. And when they do, the entire classroom benefits. That's what we're doing here. We're catching people up. The audience responded again, first claps, then a few cheers. Madison's polished mask cracked. Just slightly. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. Her voice, still coated in that signature velvet, now carried a subtle edge. So you're saying your program is only about helping one group? But what do you say to people who think that kind of focus creates dependency? That instead of empowering, you're fostering reliance? Danielle didn't blink. She smiled, but this time there was steel beneath it. Madison, when a bank gives a loan to a startup, is that dependency? Or is it investment? She didn't wait for a reply. Because what we're doing is investing in potential that's been ignored for generations. It's not about creating crutches. It's about handing out ladders in a world that was designed with too many glass ceilings. The claps came fast. Louder. Someone in the front row stood up. A producer off to the side whispered something into a headset. Madison shifted in her seat. Her next line was clearly meant to regain ground. Well, Danielle, you seem to have an answer for everything. But let's be real, there are hardworking families out there, people struggling, who might look at what you're doing and ask, what about us? How do you justify helping only one group when everyone's hurting? Danielle's gaze locked on Madison, calm but unyielding. When people say, what about us? I ask, what about justice? When a firefighter hoses down a burning home, no one accuses them of being unfair to the homes that aren't on fire. The crowd erupted again. Madison's grip on the table tightened. Danielle kept going. Helping the most underserved doesn't take anything away from anyone else. It uplifts the community as a whole. We rise when we repair. And let's be honest, these conversations about fairness, they're often just about comfort. Whose comfort are we really protecting? Because if fighting injustice makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe that discomfort is a sign we're finally addressing something real. For a full second, the studio fell into stunned silence. Then applause thundered through the room. Not polite. Not performative. Real. The kind that ripples down spines and climbs into throats. Standing ovations. Cheers. Even the teleprompter operator stopped scrolling. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. Her posture stiffened. The control she was known for had slipped fully through her fingers. Danielle sat back in her chair, hands resting on her lap, still composed, still powerful. Madison cleared her throat. Well, Danielle, I think we'll have to agree to disagree on some points. But I appreciate your perspective. Danielle nodded once, firmly. And I appreciate the space to share it. The commercial cue lit up. The show was headed to break, but the conversation was far from forgotten. Social media was already humming. Clips were already being pulled, hashtags forming. Madison Reed had hosted 1,000 interviews. But this one? This one wouldn't just go viral, it would echo. Danielle Carter hadn't come to spar. She had come to speak truth. And she had done exactly that, with the poise of a leader, the clarity of a teacher, and the fire of a woman who refused to shrink for anyone. By the time the cameras cut to commercial, the studio wasn't just buzzing, it was humming with something heavier, something electric. Danielle Carter hadn't just held her own against Madison Reed. She had flipped the entire conversation on its head, not with fire but with facts, not with shouting but with steel spine calm. The audience was still clapping when the lights dimmed, but the real eruption came when the clip hit the internet. Before Danielle even left the green room, her phone lit up like fireworks. Twitter was ablaze. Instagram reels were spinning. TikTok edits had already been posted by the time her driver pulled up to the side entrance of the studio. By noon, hashtags like hashtag Danielle Carter, hashtag Elevate Truth, and hashtag She Said What Needed to Be Said were trending nationwide. Celebrities retweeted her closing line about the boots. Activists praised her for staying cool under pressure. Everyday people, from teachers in Detroit to students in Houston, stitched her clips with videos of themselves nodding, crying, or just saying thank you. But while the world was catching fire, Danielle was sitting quietly in the back of her car, scrolling not through praise but through direct messages. What mattered most to her wasn't the fame or the viral numbers. It was the young women writing things like, "I felt seen for the first time." Or, "I didn't know we were allowed to take up space like that." Or, "You gave me my voice back." Danielle Carter didn't need validation, she needed confirmation. And this was it. Back in Atlanta, the sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline when her plane touched down. She didn't take a break, didn't rest. Instead, she headed straight to the community space she'd built 2 years ago in the heart of West End. The Elevator Future headquarters wasn't flashy, just a 2-story brick building with floor-to-ceiling windows and soft leather chairs that looked like they belonged in a startup's co-working space. But to the girls inside, it felt like a launch pad. That night, as she walked through the front door, the room erupted into cheers. It wasn't performative. It wasn't forced. It was love, pure and raw and rooted in something real. They had all watched. Some had watched live. Some had recorded it. Some had replayed that last question, "Who made the boots?" more times than they'd care to admit. Danielle spotted Imani right away. The 17-year-old had been in the program for just over 6 months, a self-taught coder who built a budgeting app for teens that was now being piloted in 3 Atlanta high schools. She was smart, introverted, and the kind of quiet that made people underestimate her. Not Danielle. Never Danielle. Imani walked up, her phone still in her hand, eyes glassy. "Miss Carter," she said, voice small but steady, "I watched what you did. You didn't just speak for us, you showed them we're not small." Danielle placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. "That power you saw on TV? It's in you too." I just lit the match. Later that week, Danielle hosted an intimate mentorship circle inside the center's main conference room. No cameras, no press, just 20 young women sitting in a circle, some with notepads, others with tear-stained cheeks, all of them ready. Danielle didn't speak like a celebrity or a CEO. She spoke like a woman who knew what it meant to be doubted, dismissed, and disrespected, and who had learned how to transform that weight into wings. "The world will ask you to shrink," she told them. "To play small. To wait your turn. And when you finally speak, they'll call it too loud, too emotional, too aggressive. But your voice? It's not up for debate. And you don't need to apologize for shining." A silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that lets truth settle in bones. Then one girl, barely 16, whispered, "How do you stay strong when everyone expects you to break?" Danielle paused, then said, "I remember who I am. And who I'm doing this for. I don't stand in rooms like that because I'm fearless. I stand in them because I'm prepared. And because the people who came before me, my mother, my grandmother, they didn't have the mic. But I do. And I'm going to use it until the next girl doesn't have to fight so hard just to be heard. That answer rippled through the room. Heads nodded. Some cried. And in that moment, they didn't just admire Danielle, they saw themselves in her. Outside the building, reporters were already circling, hoping to get a comment, a quote, a soundbite. But Danielle wasn't interested in being a media sensation. She was interested in momentum. Within days, universities began calling. Schools asked her to speak. Investment firms offered to sponsor new chapters of her program in Chicago, Oakland, Baltimore. A Silicon Valley fund asked if they could partner with her to launch an incubator for teen entrepreneurs. Danielle said yes, but on her terms. No stripping down the mission. No watering down the message. She wasn't going to let the spotlight reshape her purpose. She'd spent too many years building this from the ground up, brick by brick, speech by speech, heart by heart. Still, with all the attention, not everyone was a fan. Online, the backlash began to brew. Anonymous accounts accused her of being divisive. Comment sections filled with phrases like "what about all women?" and "why make it about race?" Danielle didn't flinch. She'd heard it all before. She knew these criticisms weren't about her tone, they were about her refusal to shrink for the comfort of others. When you stand in truth, she told her team during one meeting, someone will always call it confrontation. That's not my problem. That's theirs. 3 weeks later, Today's Edge aired a follow-up episode. Madison Reed, noticeably more reserved, opened the show by acknowledging the overwhelming public response. She didn't apologize outright, but she didn't have to. Her shift in tone spoke volumes. Sometimes, she said, we bring people on this show expecting a debate. But occasionally, what we get instead is a masterclass. She looked into the camera and added, Danielle Carter gave us one. Danielle watched that clip with her team in the office kitchen. Someone passed her a donut. Another clinked a coffee cup. They all laughed when one of the interns whispered, she finally said something smart. But Danielle didn't gloat. She just nodded and went back to planning the next workshop. Because for her, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the dozens of applications that flooded in every day. It was in the 15-year-old girl in Baton Rouge who emailed her a pitch deck for an app idea. It was in the single mom in Detroit who said her daughter watched the interview and finally believed college was worth fighting for. And one evening, as Danielle walked out of the center just before dusk, she paused under the warm Atlanta sky. The city hummed around her. Cars passed. Horns echoed. But for a moment, it all felt still. She thought about that day in the studio, about the question Madison asked, the one about fairness, about who gets to be helped, who gets to be heard. She thought about all the rooms she'd sat in where people spoke over her, doubted her, sized her up without knowing a thing about her story. And then she thought about Imani, about the other girls inside that building, about the voices being born because she didn't stay quiet. And she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. She didn't want to be a moment. She wanted to be a movement. And that movement had just begun to roar. So if you ever find yourself doubting your worth because someone told you that your story didn't matter, remember Danielle Carter. Remember that you don't need permission to speak truth. You just need the courage to stand in it. Your voice has power. Your presence has purpose. And your light, no matter how much the world tries to dim it, isn't something to hide. It's something to honor. And just like Danielle told those young women that night, your worth is not up for debate. Say your truth. Stand in it. And never apologize for shining. When I wrote the story of Danielle Carter, I didn't just want to craft a powerful moment on live television. I wanted to show what it looks like when someone refuses to shrink in the face of resistance. Danielle's story is more than a viral clip or a quotable line, it's a reflection of a truth many people live every single day. It's about being told you're too much simply because you dare to dream big, speak boldly, and take up space you've already earned. The lesson here is this: you don't need to wait for the world to make room for you. Sometimes, you have to build the table yourself and then invite others who've been shut out to sit with you. People will question your motives, your mission, even your right to lead. But remember, their discomfort is not your responsibility. Danielle didn't win that moment because she was loud or combative. She won because she stood in truth. She stayed rooted in purpose. She didn't match fire with fire, she brought water, wisdom, and unwavering calm. And that's something we can all learn from. Whether you're leading a company, raising a family, mentoring a young person, or simply trying to make a difference in your corner of the world, your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. To the young women listening today, especially those who've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, I hope you carry this story with you. Not as a fairy tale, but as proof. Proof that strength can look like poise. That impact doesn't always come with noise. That you, exactly as you are enough. And to everyone else, I challenge you to listen better, to believe in others sooner, and to make space where it's been denied for too long. Because the world doesn't need fewer voices, it needs more truth. More courage. More people who are willing to say, "This is who I am, and I'm not asking for permission to exist." Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for feeling, and for reflecting. Stories like Danielle's are happening around us every day, quiet revolutions of resilience, dignity, and truth. If this message touched your heart, inspired you, or made you think differently, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to U.S. Justice Story, where we continue to shine a light on voices that deserve to be heard. Because your story matters. And together, we're rewriting the narrative one truth at a time.